Hello and welcome to today's VMware webcast. Before we get started, there are a couple of housekeeping items that I would like to go over. First, we want to make this session as interactive as possible and encourage you to ask questions at any time using the question and answer box located to the left of the slides window. You can also use the question and answer box to get technical assistance if you should need it. The tabs located in the question and answer box are where you can find additional information about today's presentation. Today's presentation features streaming audio only, so there is no need to dial into a teleconference. You'll need to make sure that your computer speakers are turned up in order to hear the presenter and today's content. You can also fine-tune the audio by using the volume controls inside the media window. This presentation console allows you to interact and customize the layout to fit your viewing needs. You can collapse and expand any window on the console just like you would on your desktop by dragging the corners in or out. In addition, you can also maximize or close any of the windows on your screen by clicking the corresponding icon in the upper right-hand corner of each of the windows. At any time, you can reset the console to the default layout and access additional presentation functionality using the widgets at the bottom of your screen. Now I'd like to turn things over to today's presenter to get things started.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We're going to have an awesome webcast today about a deep dive on how to protect your business against disasters with VMware Site Recovery on VMware Cloud on AWS. Today's speakers are Cato Grace, a Senior Technical Marketing Architect at VMware, and Samir Kadu, Partner Solutions Architect at AWS. I'm going to hand it over to Cato. Take it.
Thanks, Ori. Welcome, everybody. I'm going to just really quick go over our agenda. So we'll have a quick overview. We're going to do a demo of seeing the product in action, seeing what it is capable of, what it can do, talk through the architecture, use cases, different topologies we support, how to get it deployed, some details around replication, talking about protection, recovery, and reporting. So we've got a lot of content to cover, and let's get to it. Samir?
Yep, thank you, Cato. We'll go through an overview. So one of the key things to keep in mind with VMware Cloud on AWS, it is a jointly engineered cloud service. So meaning that your VMware Cloud on AWS SDDC is running on AWS bare metal instances. This is sold, operated, and supported by VMware and its partners. It allows for on-demand capacity and flexibility as far as flexible consumption. You do have the full operational consistency with your on-premises SDDC, and then also the seamless large-scale workload portability and hybrid operations that comes with it, as well as global AWS footprint, allowing for the reach and availability over time, and direct access to native AWS services, meaning your VMs have the power to access native AWS services when needed. So some of the problems with existing VR solutions that we see today are the high cost and inefficient use of resources, the significant complexity and manual effort that comes with it, being unreliable as far as testing, disruptive, and insufficient, reliance on the scarce personnel that you have, and as far as difficulty in scaling it. So why VMware Site Recovery? This is going to allow you to have that increased reliability. It's going to simplify your deployment and then also allow you to reduce your costs. It is built on proven solutions. The VMware Site Recovery Manager, it's a mature and established solution that allows for the centralized recovery plan. Non-disruptive as far as allowing you to do recovery testing when needed. And it also allows for automated DR workflows that can be established for your applications. It enables fast and predictable RTOs. And then with vSphere replication, it's per VM host-based replication. It replicates only changed data. And then also it protects any VM, regardless of the operating system or application. This allows you to have the end-to-end disaster recovery capability. It's non-disruptive as far as your testing. The automated testing and isolated network, it ensures predictability of recovery time objectives. The automated failback. So it reprotects using your original recovery plan It streamlines that bidirectional migration. It's automated failover that comes into play as far as the runbook automation, single-click initiation. It emphasizes fastest possible recovery after an outage, and then also the detailed reporting that you get as far as single-click report generation, detailed reporting for each individual workflow, and then also summarized test results and detailed coverage of all steps. Now I'll hand it to Cato for a demo.
Thanks, Samir. Let me just get my screen shared. So you should be seeing, Samir, can you, or somebody just confirm you can see my?
I can see it.
Okay, great. Yeah, so this is the console window within VMware Cloud on AWS. So this is what it looks like when you're looking at one of your SDDCs. And we can see that in this environment, we actually have 2 clusters deployed. You can see down here at the bottom of the screen, cluster 1, 3 hosts with 32 terabytes of storage, and cluster 2, again, 3 hosts and 105 terabytes of storage. And let's take a look at what that looks like within vCenter. And you'll notice that within vCenter, that we're able to connect to a single vCenter and see both environments, both our on-prem environment, that's what you see up at the top, as well as our VMware Cloud on AWS environment, which is the second vCenter here. And that's a capability known as hybrid linked mode, and just gives you that, that visibility into both of those environments through the same interface. So looking at our on-prem environment, our on-prem environment consists of about 10 hosts and around 500 VMs. And those 500 VMs are, that's running in our New York data center. Cluster 2 in our Tokyo data center also consists of about 500 VMs. Cluster 1 within our VMware Cloud on AWS environment is the recovery site for New York. So this is the cluster where our New York VMs will be recovered, and we're currently protecting all 500 of those VMs. And one of the things you'll notice is that our environment in VMware Cloud on AWS only currently consists of 3 hosts. We're running on 10 hosts within our production cluster. We only have 3 hosts within VMware Cloud on AWS, and we're doing that because while we're not using those resources within VMware Cloud on AWS, we only want to use the minimum amount that we need in order to just to kind of run our basic services and really just kind of keep the lights on and be ready in the event of a disaster to deal with that. Cluster 2, similar setup. This is the backup site for Tokyo. Again, 3 hosts in that environment. Taking a look at cluster 1 again, and what do you know? I'm trying to do a disaster recovery demo, and we just had a disaster in our environment. Looks like cluster 1 in New York is down. All 10 of those hosts are showing as unavailable. All of our VMs in that environment are showing as disconnected. Fortunately for us, we've already set up VMware Site Recovery, so let's go take a look at how we get that environment recovered within VMware Cloud on AWS. So we connect into our Site Recovery interface. We can see this is the pair of sites that we're going to be working with. This interface just gives you an idea that you can actually, and we do support multiple pairs of, multiple protected and recovery sites. So a couple of different options there. Just looking at the summary page, we see that we've got these errors are just related to the fact that replications aren't working because our production site is currently down. And we're going to be talking a little bit later about some of the details of protection groups and recovery plans and things like that. For right now, the important thing to just note is we have a recovery plan specifically for this situation. New York City, entire data center failing over to VMC cluster 1. So take a quick look at those, the recovery steps, and we're just going to kick off this recovery plan. And you can see how easy it is to get that recovery running. You've done all the work on the front end of getting everything prepared for this, and you're able to just kick off that recovery and start that process of getting those VMs stood back up. You'll notice that we do have some errors here in the running of this recovery plan. Those are just related to the fact that the production site is currently down, and there's no impact to the actual recovery. We'll go take a look here in just a second at our vCenter, and our New York cluster is still down. All those VMs are still unavailable. But if we minimize that just so that we can look closer at our VMware Cloud on AWS environment, we can see that all of our VMs are now running within VMware Cloud on AWS. So we powered on all of those VMs, got them all failed over and everything, and everything's running within VMware Cloud on AWS. And one of the other things that you'll notice is that that cluster went from being a 3-host cluster to now it's an 8-host cluster. We added 5 additional hosts into that cluster, and we're actually right in the process right now of adding that last additional host. And this is one of the most powerful things about the VMware Cloud on AWS offering. And this is that ability to harness the power of cloud and the elastic resources that provides, harness that in the disaster recovery space. So you don't have to maintain an identical recovery site with all of those resources at that recovery site that you need. What you're able to do is dynamically expand when you have a disaster, expand out, have those resources that you're able to provide to customers, to your workloads, and then in the event of when things get better, you're able to fail back over. Again, you can dynamically contract that down and reduce that footprint. And that covers everything. VMware Cloud on AWS is utilizing vSAN for its storage, and so that storage can dynamically expand and contract as part of that. The one last thing that I wanted to show you is going back to the VMware Cloud on AWS console. Is you can see here in cluster 1, we're currently in the process of deploying hosts. We've increased that number of hosts to 8. We have this ability of actually setting what we call Elastic Drs, which takes that idea of DRS where you're balancing the VMs within an environment, moving VMs around so that no one particular host is overloaded and all of the VMs are getting the resources that they need. We've taken that concept and expanded it to doing it on the host level, where we can actually add and remove hosts from a cluster so that you're getting the best value and the best performance for your VMs, as well as not using any more resources than what are required. And you can see that we have some guidelines there that we're able to define for that. This could be used as well within a recovery environment to adjust the amount of resources that your environment is consuming. So with that, I am going to switch back over to slides. And let's talk about architecture. So the way that VMware Site Recovery works is the pieces that are involved in putting it together are within the customer environment. You're going to have obviously your vSphere hosts. You're going to have your vCenter. Note that vCenter there's multiple versions of vCenter that we support. It can be 6.0, U3 or higher. And then you're going to have storage, and your storage can again be any storage that's supported with vSphere. It can be vSAN. You can be using VMFS, NFS, vVols, local storage. Whatever makes sense. All of those different options are included. Within VMware Cloud and AWS, the default configuration is you're going to have your vCenter, you're going to have vSphere, you're going to have vSAN. And one really important thing to keep in mind with VMware Cloud and AWS is that everything within VMware Cloud and AWS is managed, deployed, and maintained by VMware. So it's not something that you don't have to think about anything other than consuming those resources. I'm going to try and keep an eye on questions as we're going, and we'll either answer those through text or verbally. But I just saw one question: do you pay extra for Elastic DRS? No, that's an option that's included as part of VMware Cloud and AWS. So no additional cost there. So when you deploy, when you enable VMware Site Recovery or VMware Cloud and AWS, again, what we'll do is VMware will take care of deploying vSphere Replication and Site Recovery Manager within the VMware Cloud and AWS environment. So we'll take care of the entire configuration. Those will be, IP addresses, certificates, all of the different deployment that is required for that. We'll take care of that. What you as the user would need to do is deploy vSphere Replication and Site Recovery Manager on-prem. So you'd need to take care of getting those servers installed and configured there. And at that point, everything is ready to go from, at that point, you're ready to start replicating VMs and protecting them. So really simple setup and configuration, and Sameer's actually going to walk through that in even a little bit more detail. We also support this between SDVC instances. So if you have multiple SDVCs within VMware Cloud on AWS, we can take care of protecting VMs between those as well. One thing to note there is that everything within that environment would be managed and maintained by VMware. So all of that would be taken care of. I see a question about what versions of SRM are supported, and this is a perfect slide that hopefully will answer that question. So we currently support SRM 8.1. That's the version of SRM and vSphere Replication that we work with within VMware Cloud and AWS. The cool part is that we support multiple versions of vCenter. So you don't have to be using the same version of vCenter that we're using within VMware Cloud and AWS. You can use, like I said before, 6.0 U3 and higher, so 6.0 U3, 6.5, or 6.7. And all of those, you can upgrade between versions of vCenter. That's fully supported as well. So lots of flexibility there when it comes to how you're going to have that set up and configured. As far as connectivity options, we support multiple different connectivity options from your on-prem environment to your VMware Cloud and AWS environment. So either, that can be either an IPsec VPN, a VPN over Direct Connect, Layer 2 VPN as well. All of those different options are supported. Let's talk a little bit about use cases and topology options. So from a use case standpoint, the thing that most people would think of, I mean, obviously we're talking about disaster recovery, is, that's the most frequently thought of use case is, recovering your systems when you actually have an outage. And VMware Site Recovery is going to give you a really fast RTO for that. Lets you recover from unexpected failures, and that can be either full or partial. So it doesn't have to be, you don't have to fail over an entire site. If you want, if your outage is just a smaller subset of that, you can fail over just that one part. The one thing that people sometimes don't think about is disaster avoidance. So you can also use this to get your workloads out of the way of a potential disaster or an incoming disaster. That could be something like, there's the potential of a flood in your area, or the power company warns about power outages or something like that, and or hurricanes on the horizon, whatever that is. You're able to move those workloads over and do it in a graceful way instead of actually having them, incurring a specific outage. You're able to do that in advance and make sure that you don't lose any data loss and that everything is able to shut down cleanly prior to starting up at your recovery site. Talking about multiple site configurations, VMware Cloud on AWS supports a couple of different options when it comes to site configuration. So if you currently are using SRM and you're protecting VMs from a primary site to a secondary site, you could add VMware Cloud on AWS as an additional option there. So you could protect some VMs on-prem to on-prem and other VMs on-prem to VMware Cloud on AWS. Additionally, you can also go the other way. You can also have multiple remote sites, multiple on-prem sites, all failing over to the same VMware Cloud on AWS instance. So we support up to 10 pairs. So basically 10 remote sites could fail over to a single VMware Cloud on AWS instance. As far as configurations for your recovery, we support a couple of different options. One that we see fairly often is the idea of an active-active. And the idea here would be is that you're running your production workloads within your on-prem environment, and then within your VMware Cloud on AWS environment, maybe you're running your Tier 3 and Tier 4 workloads or something like that. And in the event of a disaster, what you're able to do is you could either power off those workloads that are running within VMware Cloud on AWS and use those resources for your higher priority workloads. Or, as we showed in the demo, you could expand out that environment, increase the number of hosts to support the workload for both of those. So a couple of different options there, but that active-active use case is often what makes a lot of sense. Additionally, we support bidirectional failover. So if you wanted to run production workloads both on-prem and within VMware Cloud on AWS and have those workloads protected in both directions, that's fully supported as well. One thing that we introduced just recently is the idea of Elastic vSAN, which we have a particular storage, a particular host type that allows you to scale up the amount of storage that's allocated to it. So you can go anywhere from 15 terabytes up to 35 terabytes for those hosts. And that just gives you an ability to scale storage independently of hosts. So, if your environment is storage heavy, you wouldn't necessarily have to increase the number of hosts in order to increase your storage. You're more easily able to right size your storage resources in line with your compute. And the last thing from a topology standpoint is we support stretch clusters deployed within VMware Cloud on AWS. So if you need a higher level of resiliency, we support that stretch cluster capability, and that can be tied in with VMware Site Recovery as well to give you, an even more enhanced level of availability. You're able to tolerate the failure of availability zones. You're able to tolerate the failure of your on-prem site. So multiple levels of resiliency there that are possible with VMware Cloud on AWS and VMware Site Recovery. And Samir's going to be talking with you now a little bit more about deployment and a few other things.
Thank you. So now you have that ability for the quick and easy way to deploy Site Recovery for VMware Cloud on AWS. One of the quick things comes down to where you can enable VMware Site Recovery and VMware Cloud on AWS. Then you configure VMware Cloud on AWS Firewall. Then you set up where you're downloading and deploying the vSphere Replication and Site Recovery Manager appliance. Then you will pair your sites, map your resources, and define the placeholder data stores. And then lastly, replicate and protect the VM. So as far as enabling VMware Site Recovery and VMC on AWS or VMware Cloud on AWS, one of the key things to keep in mind is part of enabling the service is adding the firewall rules to allow the VSR components to communicate from VMware Cloud on AWS to your own site. So you're going to click on Activate, allow it about 15 minutes, download the on-premises components while the cloud configuration continues, and then VMware Cloud on AWS is now ready to be paired. And then you will configure the VMC on AWS or the VMware Cloud on AWS firewall. So this will allow for the simple rules to allow for our Site Recovery Manager and the vSphere Replication appliance to communicate. This allows for simple, easy implementation and configuration to take place. And then as far as downloading and deploying, you will download and deploy the vSphere Replication and Site Recovery Manager on premises. So what happens is, pretty much you go through the process of downloading it, setting it up. You walk through the configuration. And then next, you will pretty much take care of pairing your site and map your resources. And then you'll want to start replicating and protecting your VM. So think about it from the standpoint where you have a single workflow for your replication, your protection groups, and your recovery flow. As far as VMware Site Recovery deployment, some of the key things to keep in mind. You go through the internal configuration where you pair your sites, the resource mappings as far as your networks are accounted for, then your folders, your VMs and templates, and then also storage policies, placeholder data stores are also taken care of, protection groups, and then also the recovery plan. And now we'll get into the replication. So as far as vSphere replication, it's a network efficient way of replicating only the change data. So this is going to allow you where vSphere replication is configured on a per VM basis, allowing fine control over which VM is replicated. After the initial replication, only changes to that VM are replicated to minimize network bandwidth consumption. So with vSphere replication, which is included with vSphere Essentials Plus Kit and higher editions, all editions of VSOM and all editions of the Suite as well. So with vSphere replication, some of the key things to keep in mind. It's going to allow you to protect any of the VMs, regardless of the operating system or application. It allows for the flexible recovery point objective for the RPO policies. It's compatible with vSAN, SAN, NAS, local storage. It allows for end-to-end network compression, and then Windows VSS and Linux file system BSA. And then as far as protection, so what is a protection group? Think about it as a group of VMs that will be recovered together. So it could be a set of applications, maybe you're dividing your applications or VMs based on the department, or maybe it's according to business requirement. The VM can only belong to one protection group. A protection group can belong to one or more recovery plans. The protection groups are a way of protecting or grouping your virtual machines that will be recovered together. And then one of the key things to keep in mind is creating a protection group for each application service has a benefit of selective testing. So now you have that quick, easy way to perform selective testing as needed. And then a protection group contains virtual machines whose data has been replicated by either array-based replication or vSphere replication. So as far as organizing protection groups, one of the quick ways to do it is you can group your VMs as desired into protection groups, which we mentioned earlier. And also think about the storage they're located on, as that doesn't matter anymore either. So let's say maybe you have a protection group for your web applications, maybe a second protection group for your email-based applications, and maybe even a third protection group for your SharePoint servers in your environment. So now you also have that simplified workflow for replicating and protecting your VM. So when you go to configure it, so think about it where you're configuring your replication, you set up protection groups as needed. In the protection groups, you can still use that single workflow for the replication, your protection groups, and even your recovery plan. And then now I'll hand it over to Cato in regards to recovery.
Thanks, Samir.
Sure.
So let's talk a little bit about the process of actually getting your VMs recovered. So when you think about organizing recovery, so Samir talked about protection groups. And within VMware Site Recovery, we have this concept of protection groups and then recovery plans. And while each VM can only belong to a single protection group, a protection group can then belong to one or more recovery plans, depending on what your requirements are. So what this does is it gives you the flexibility of defining, having your protection groups outlined to specific application types. That's usually what we see people do with that. And then you can have a recovery plan for individual applications, and then also a recovery plan for an entire site. So you have that ability to handle both of those. And the recovery plans are where you run your workflows. So what this allows you to do is you can do things like run a test or run a failover of just our web application. If we wanted to verify that things work the way that we expect, we can run just that, a test just of that web application. We don't have to run it for everything. And then we also at the same time have an ability to do the entire site as well. So just having that, and this granularity can be done at multiple levels. So protection group can belong to not just more than one recovery plan, but more than two, more than three. Whatever makes sense in your environment, you're able to figure that out from a standpoint of how you want to organize those protection groups and those recovery plans. An important part of getting your VMs powered on is, and really at the end of the day, it's not just about VMs, it's about applications. And applications usually have some dependency in terms of how they're powered on, and their functionality is tied to the order that those VMs are powered on in. I see a question, and this is as good a time as any to answer it. Any limitations on the number of recovery plans? Currently, we support up to 250 recovery plans. We support running up to 10 of those at a time. Usually, the limit for the number of VMs that we support protecting with VMware Site Recovery is currently 1,000. So those are basically the limits, and that should support the majority of use cases. As far as priority groups and dependencies go, in order to get your VMs powered on in the order that you need them to be, we have a couple of different ways that we can handle that. So what we can do is we can organize your VMs into priority groups, and we support up to 5 priority groups. And the way that VMware Site Recovery is going to work is that it's going to power on the VMs in a priority group, all of the VMs that are in that priority group first before it moves on to the next one. And then in addition to just powering them on, it's actually going to wait for VM tools heartbeats to respond before it moves on to the next VM. So it's not just powering them on and then moving on to the next thing. It's going to power it on. It's going to wait for VM tools to come up and start responding. And then it's going to figure that that VM is ready to be is powered on, it's ready to go, and it's going to move on to the next thing. So in this case, we have priority group 1 that has our master database. We get that powered on. Then we go to priority group 2. We're going to power on both the database and the Exchange server at the same time. Those two aren't dependent on each other. Get both of those powered on and running. Then we get to priority group 3, and in this case, we have an application server, or actually 2 application servers, and one of them has a dependency on the other one. So the other level of granularity that we can do is, in addition to priority groups, is we can define dependencies within a priority group. So in this case, we can say that App Server 2 is dependent on App Server 1. And so once App Server 1 is running and VM Tools heartbeats are responding, then we can move on to App Server 2. And then move on to priority group 4, priority group 5, get all of those VMs powered on in that order. And that's the way that we can make sure that your VMs and your applications come up in the exact way that they need to in order to make sure that your applications do all the things that you need them to be doing. I saw one question in the Q&A, and I didn't answer it because I knew this slide was coming up. As far as customizing IP addresses, so we support a couple of different options. One option for IP addresses is we support a layer 2 network extension from your on-prem environment into your VMware Cloud and AWS environment. And what that would mean is that you wouldn't have to change the IP address as part of that failover. If for some reason that doesn't work, or that option doesn't work for you for whatever reason, we also support VMware Site Recovery customizing the IP address as part of your failover process. And we support doing that in a couple of different ways. We support either doing it per VM, so you can go in and for each individual VM, you customize that IP address setting. Or the other option that we support is we can actually do a thing called subnet mapping. So as part of the configuration, Samir talked about doing mapping your resources. So one of the things, the reason that we do that is that we're talking about moving VMs between vCenters. So you have, and within a vCenter, you have things like networks, folders, resource pools, storage policies. So what we need to do is we need to map those between those 2 vCenters so that when a VM is moved from one to the other, if it was connected to a particular network located in a particular folder, maybe in a particular resource pool, that we know what to connect it to at the recovery site. So in addition to that, what we can add on top of the network mapping is we can add a subnet map. And what that means is that will allow us to, as in the example that you can see on the screen here, we have a VM that was connected to, is on subnet 10.10.10.0. Let's say its IP address was 10.10.10.50, and we have that mapped to the 192.168.100 network. And so when we fail that VM over, without having to do any individual customization settings for a particular VM, it will automatically change that VM's IP address from 10.10.10.50 to 192.168.100.50. So just enabling that mapping makes that whole process of getting those IP addresses configured easier. We also support running post-power-on scripts, so those can be run on individual VMs as part of the power-on process, and we support running multiple scripts as part of doing that. In the demo that I showed you, the way that we actually increase the size and the number of size of the cluster, the number of hosts in that cluster, is that we actually ran a script that increased the size of that. Added additional hosts into that environment because that's what we needed. I see a question, any limit on number of recovery groups? Yeah, I previously mentioned we support up to 250. So in addition to power on scripts, let's talk now about workflows and the different workflows that we support. So Samir went through this a little bit before. The main things that you're going to be doing with VMware Site Recovery would be either the automated failover and the non-disruptive testing. And the non-disruptive testing, to me, is really one of the coolest parts of VMware Site Recovery, is that ability to non-disruptively test your recovery. To not have to impact any of your production systems. You don't have to schedule downtime. You don't have to do it on a weekend. Anytime that you need to, you're able to test and verify that your recovery plan is going to work the way that you expect it to. Obviously, we do automated failover as well, and the automated failback is another one that's really nice. And I'll walk through all of those in a little bit more detail here right now. As far as testing goes, the thing that I wanted to highlight here is how we're able to do this testing and have it be non-disruptive. So what we're able to do is we have our VMs running at the customer site, and they're being replicated into VMware Cloud on AWS. You have the replica VMs within VMware Cloud on AWS. Without interrupting that replication, what we do is we take a snapshot of those replicated VMs, and then we mount that snapshot. We mount that snapshot into inventory and add those into the vCenter inventory and get those powered on. And that way, replication continues. There's no RPO change. There's no impact to replication or your RPOs. But we're still able to get a current copy of that VM to use as a test to verify that the recovery works as the way that you expect, and that your VMs are recovered as you would, your applications work as you would expect them to. From a networking standpoint, what we do to keep things isolated is going back again to that idea of mapping resources. When you map your resources, one of the things that you will map as well is a test network. So you can have you have the network that your VMs will fail over to in the event of an actual failover, and in the event of a test, you can have them fail over to a different network. And that other network can either be something that VMware Site Recovery creates itself, and there's a little bit of restrictions there, or it can actually be a test network that, and this would be the way that I would recommend doing it, a network that duplicates your production network with the exception of just being isolated. So you want to keep that traffic isolated because we're talking about deploying clones, basically a clone of your production VM as part of running that test. When you run a recovery plan, the things that we're going to walk through just quickly and at a high level is when you run a recovery plan, and this is either in planned migration or disaster recovery mode, is we're going to synchronize, we'll synchronize your replication. Then we'll power off the VMs in the reverse order that they would be powered on. And then we're going to synchronize replication again. And the reason that we do both of those is we want your VMs, if you're doing a disaster avoidance, we want your VMs to be powered off for as short a time as possible. So synchronize replication again. And just one note, during the demo that we watched, when the production site was down, these were the 3 steps where we got errors. And that's because these are steps that are taking place at your protected site. And if your protected site is unavailable, we're going to try to do those steps. But if it doesn't work, the recovery plan is just going to keep running. It doesn't impact the recoverability of your environment. We'll do some prep of those recovery VMs, get them added into inventory, get them all ready. We can, as part of the recovery plan, you can actually power off non-critical VMs at the recovery site. Then we customize IP addresses, which is powering on those VMs with their networks disconnected, customizing the IP address, and then powering them back off. And then we power on those VMs in the order that we went through previously. Fail back is the process of reversing this. So if you start at position 1 and you're running within your on-prem environment, and you fail over to VMware Cloud on AWS. So now your VMs are running within VMware Cloud on AWS. That would be step 2. You would then run a reprotect process. And what that would do is that would reverse replication and reverse protection so that your VMs are running within VMware Cloud on AWS, but now they're being replicated and protected back to your on-prem environment. Then what that would allow you to do is then migrate those VMs back from VMware Cloud on AWS back to your on-prem environment when everything's back up and running and you're ready to do that. Then you would run that reprotect process again, reverse replication, reverse protection, and that puts you back in the situation where your VMs are now replicating from on-prem to your VMware Cloud on AWS environment. They're protected that way, and that way you're ready in the event of any kind of new disaster or issue to get them failed over. So really quick, we'll talk about reporting. VMware Site Recovery supports multiple levels of reporting. And I see a question, and it's very timely, so I'm just going to answer it right now. When we reverse replication, does all the data need to be fully copied over, or would it just do deltas? It will just do deltas. What it will do is it'll run a checksum to verify, to determine what the difference is between the on-prem and the previous protected site copy, and then it'll just copy those changes over. And then another question, failback is not part of the recovery plan, it's a separate manual action. That's correct. Yeah, failback is not something, when you run a, if you think about it, your production site goes down, you would fail over to your recovery site. At that point, you're not ready to do anything as far as reprotecting or failing back because your production site is potentially still down. So when that production site is back up and ready, then you would be able to run your reprotect, and then you could run the failback. So yeah, those processes are definitely separate. So yeah, as far as reporting goes, we do different levels of reporting. So we support, we have reports that show for each recovery plan, we have reports that show what operation was run, what the result was, when it was run, how long it took, who ran it, all of that, as well as detailed reports for each one of those workflows that shows every individual step of that recovery plan and how long it took and what the result was. All of those details you can see. I know it's a little bit small, but these are multiple, for every VM and every part of this recovery, there's multiple steps that occur. So we include lots of detail there related to that. One other question related to recovery: what happens if the on-prem site comes back online during the failover process? Really, nothing from a recovery standpoint. The VMs are still going to be recovered just the same as they normally would. What you would want to do, though, as if your recovery site or your protected site came back online, your VMs are probably going to start getting powered back up. If you have HA enabled, you would want to just power off those VMs at your protected site because you're going to be deploying, you're going to be recovering those within your VMware Cloud and AWS environment. So I'm going to hand it back over to Samir to talk about, kind of wrap things up and talk about some of our additional resources that we have available.
Sure, thank you, Cato. So some of the key things to keep in mind is, I know several questions did come up about pricing. So pricing has been made available on VMware's website as well. So if you just search VMware Cloud on AWS pricing, you'll be taken to their website in regards to that. I know you did mention already the granular on-demand cloud pricing, so that is something to keep in mind. There is that additional promotion that comes into play for the first 200 VMs that are protected for free for 90 days, so keep that in mind. You do need to sign up in order for that to be utilized. Spots are limited as far as the promotional process. And then from a promotional price, there is a promotion in place for VMs that are protected. with Site Recovery for VMware Cloud on AWS as far as $18 per month per protected VM. And then we just want to hit upon a customer story where this was utilized as well. So think about it from a physical security company standpoint. They needed to reduce the overhead of maintaining a secondary DR set. Other DR as a service solutions were too complicated to utilize. The initial US rollout was hugely successful in this particular case when utilizing Site Recovery in VMware Cloud on AWS. They were able to protect their European deployments as well. And then also, they were able to close down all of their on-premises DR targets, and now they're able to protect over 600 VMs in the cloud. Feel free to learn more about this at cloud.vmware.com/vmware-site-recovery. And then also, I want to say and put out a quick call out as far as the hands-on labs. VMware has done a wonderful job as far as providing hands-on labs available for free. So feel free to check out the hol.vmware.com website in regards to the HOL for VMware Cloud on AWS. And then also feel free to try it out with our 90-day promotion. And then there is a QR code over here. So if you want to scan it with your phone or mobile device, feel free to check it out. But this is going to take you to the promotional site in regards for the starter single host option. So if you want to utilize the single host SPVC, you do have the option to literally kick the tires for it with VMware Cloud on AWS, get started as soon as possible. So it's a quick, easy way to try it out, see if it's feasible for you. It's for your non-production-based workloads to try it out with. And then if you want to get started with a production-based 3-host SVC, you do have the option where you can utilize that and get started as well. There is an offer for the price of 2 hosts rather than the 3 hosts. And then with the single host SVC, there is a promotional offer as far as 20% off for the first 3 months. And then here's several links where you can learn more about VMware Cloud on AWS. So feel free to check out the website. We do have several overview videos as well. And then there is a solution brief. And then as far as the TCO brief that's available, and again, I did mention the hands-on labs. Feel free to check out the release notes for continuing updates. And then feel free to follow us on Twitter as well. And give us a shout out at #VMW on AWS. And then VMware Cloud on AWS videos, which are available on YouTube. And then feel free to read more about the Cloud on AWS blogs that are available to you. And then lastly, don't forget about VMworld 2019. So between August 25th to 29th, it's taking place in San Francisco, and then November 4th through 7th in Barcelona. So feel free to learn more about VMware, its partners, its offerings. It's a great way to even network with people, so definitely check it out. Thank you for your time today. We'll go through some of the questions as well. Kato, is there anything that you want to hit upon as far as Q&A? Sorry. Go ahead.
No, I figured we could start answering questions.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, one question I see here is, in order for priority groups to work, does it mean that all VMs managed that way must have VMware tools installed? It does not. It's recommended because in order, if you want SRM, VMware Site Recovery to be able to know that a VM has been powered on, having VM tools will allow it to do that. However, if you have like an appliance or something like that where it doesn't have VM tools installed and you don't want to you don't want to deal with that or you can't deal with that, you can set it to not wait for VM tools heartbeat. And so yeah, you don't have to have it, but it would be recommended. See, without an SDN like NSX, do we need to manually reassign the IP addresses? No, VMware Site Recovery doesn't require NSX on-prem. So if you need, if you're trying to customize IP addresses, yeah, that's not, there's no requirement to have NSX on-prem in order to do that. You can use the individual IP customization or using IP subnet mapping with both of those. Let's see, are priority groups sub-protection group? No. So priority groups work across protection groups. It's a little bit of a complicated thing to try and explain, but let's say you have two protection groups, and within each one they both contain an application, and that application has, as a standard 3-tier application, the database, app server, web server, and they need to be started in that order. So if you define priority groups for those two different applications that are in two different protection groups, you put the database server in priority group 1, the app server in priority group 2, the web server in priority group 3. If you added both of those protection groups to the same recovery plan, the way that those would be recovered is it would just put both of the database servers in priority group 1. So both of the database servers would start first, then it would move on to the app servers, then it would move on to the web servers for both of them. Let's see. Any other questions? There's a question about cost predictability. Yeah, cost predictability is key for any company thinking about leveraging cloud services. You've covered part of the uncertainty by assigning a price per host, but is that all we need to be concerned about? Meaning, are there any other additional charges? Yeah, there are. You do need to be aware of, and I apologize, I'm not entirely clear on what additional charges there are, but there are charges related to data transfer. And I'm not sure if there's any other additional costs other than that, but there are some additional costs, and it's worth looking into. But they are the kind of thing that you can prepare for and be aware of beforehand. It's not the kind of thing that you'd have to have uncertainty about. And that. I think that does it for all of the questions that I see. Thank you very much to everybody for attending, and thank you so much for all the questions. It's really nice to have some interaction with this. So, yeah, anything else to add, Samir?
No, thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay. We have another 2 minutes, so I don't know if we want to just wait for any additional questions or thank everybody. And we're happy to wait. I guess I was planning on being here for another 2 minutes anyway, so you have a chance. Ask your questions. The question about what's the next webinar, I actually don't know what our next webinar is. I would imagine that's on our website. But, yeah, and you are all very welcome. Seeing a few thanks come in, you're very welcome. Thank you for attending. Thanks for the questions. Thanks for the feedback. Really appreciate it. One minute and counting. Any questions about VMware Site Recovery or VMware Cloud on AWS that you wanted answered? Any questions about even just regular Site Recovery Manager? Happy to answer those as well. vSphere Replication. See, one thing, SRM is an extra cost. The cost for SRM is included with the service. You don't have to pay for SRM on-prem. Let's see. Lots of moving parts with this solution. Hopefully you can use the material in this presentation to create a cookbook. We have a getting started guide for VMware Site Recovery that includes almost everything we covered in this session, as well as a whole lot more. So that combined with the documentation that's available, you should be all set with getting going. VMC on AWS, always a separate vCenter, cannot have hosts on-prem and on AWS in the same vCenter. That's correct. You can't have the VMware Cloud on AWS, the vCenter that manages the VMware Cloud on AWS hosts is going to be a different, it has to be its own vCenter because that vCenter is managed and maintained by VMware. Your on-prem vCenter is going to be managed and maintained by you. So that's the reason that those ones are going to be separate. A few more thanks coming in. Thank you. I mean, you're very welcome. We're happy to present and grateful you attended. So, I think at this point we're out of time. Again, thank you very much for attending. Thanks for all the questions, all the engagement. And have a great day.
Thank you.